So, good day. Today, I will be discussing to you the next topic for Remedial Instruction course, which tackles about remedial instruction and listening. But before going to our discussion, let us first look into our objectives. So, at the end of our discussion, you will be able to develop your ability to diagnose student needs and prescribe tasks that create better matches between learning needs and preferences. Next, you will be able to create activities that aid in the reading skills of the students. Next, you will be able to explain the value of creating specific materials for students with writing disabilities. So for our discussion today under this lesson, we will divide our discussion into two sessions. So for our session for today, we will tackling about the difference between hearing and listening and what are the factors that affects students' listening comprehension. So for our last session, we will be discussing about on how to improve our students' listening comprehension, what are the classroom activities that can help the students to improve their listening skills, and lastly, how to enhance your listening as an individual. So since we are dealing with listening, let us first watch a 50-second video that can give you a glimpse of what are the differences between hearing and listening. So let us watch and enjoy. So, upon watching the video, let us now discuss on what are the differences between hearing and listening. So, we all know that hearing and listening uses both of our ears, but now let us discuss what are the differences between them. So, when we say hearing, it is part of the five senses, while listening is a choice to hear and analyze what you have heard. So, hearing is a skill where you use your ears only, while listening leads to learning, meaning you make sense of what you have heard. Next, hearing is receiving sound waves through your ears, while listening means hearing and understanding what you have heard. So hearing just happens all the time, whether you like it or not. While listening, on the other hand, lets the sound you hear go through your brain to process the meaning of what you have heard. Next, listening is observing others' behavior that can add meaning to the message, while hearing is simply receiving sound vibration. So, listening is psychological. It requires a lot of attention and concentration for the listener, so the brain can process the meaning from the words and sentences that we hear. On the other hand, hearing is only an involuntary act where you receive vibrations through your ears. As what I have said earlier, hearing is using your ears only, while listening is using your body's other senses. It can be your sense, it can be seeing or sense of touch. Lastly, listening can build better relationship with others, while hearing cannot. So listening requires concentrations for the listeners rather, at conscious level, so that they will be able to understand what the speaker says to them, while hearing simply happens. So let us now dig deeper on the definition. What is listening? So first, listening matters as much as speaking, reading, writing, observing, and expressing. So listening is same as important of the other macro skills. So if a speaker has no intended audience, then the mechanism of communication is incomplete. Next, according to English Club, listening is receiving language through the ears. It involves identifying the sounds of speech and processing them into words and sentences. We use our ears to receive individual sounds, and we use our brain to convert these into messages that mean something to us. So listening means hearing and understanding what we have heard. It entails identifying the sounds such as letters, stress, rhythm, and pauses. We use to process them into words and phrases to make meaning or messages. Next, listening fulfills the main function of speech. So, listening is a vital part in the communication process, right? So, when someone delivers ideas in communication, the audience can understand the idea as well. So next, listening is a receptive ability that helps individuals to collect information and ultimately develop a repertoire of knowledge required to formulate new ideas that can be shared with other people either verbally or visually. So when we say listening, it is a skill or an ability of an individual to hear, collect information, and create meaning from what they have heard. So it helps them to build new ideas that can be used or can be shared to other people in many forms. Lastly, when we say listening, it is not only part of the entire communication process. So listening partakes in the section also where messages are interpreted, but also from the point where the messages are made. So it involves why we need to hear these messages in order for us to create a meaning from it. But then, in spite of the importance of listening, people are not putting importance to it because of some misconceptions. So listening can be better understood by unrevealing its complexities. So it is not simple as it seems, right? Listening is essential. It is the key to better communication. It helps us to navigate through difficult conversation, and it can build a better understanding, and that leads to a better relationship. So many believe that listening skill is too simple, that it is negligible, while others think that it is too layered, that there is no way to go about it. So many experts agreed to this notion, so that every individual, for example, as future teachers, know its importance and be able to address the listening problems of the students. So therefore, it is crucial to come up with remedial activities that addresses the problem of the students and in listening. So let us now discuss what are the factors affecting students' listening comprehension. But before we deal with that, let us first define what is listening comprehension. So listening comprehension is quite universally known to be one of the most, if not the most, demanding language skills. Why? Because listening comprehension encompasses the multiple processes involved in making sense of spoken language, or making sense of what we hear. It requires a thoughtful attention paid to what the speaker said, and not just a passive act of hearing alone. Next, listening comprehension is a quite complex beast, as it consists of lots of smaller sub-beasts or sub-skills, if you will. So, listening comprehension is the precursor to reading comprehension and for overall communication. So, it is important skill to develop, not just hearing alone. So, one good example is when you hear a story that is read aloud, a student or a person who have a good listening skill will be able to understand the context of the story. He or she will be able to remember it, discuss it, and retell the story in their own words afterwards. So furthermore, according to NAVDIG 2013, listening comprehension encompasses the multiple processes involved in understanding and making sense of spoken language. This include recognizing speech sounds, understanding the meaning of individual words, and or understanding the syntax of sentences in which they are presented. So listening comprehension entails various processes in understanding what we have heard. It involves sub-skills such as recognizing speech sounds, meaning of individual words, and or understanding the syntax of sentences or how words are combined to form sentences. So as you will see in the moment, almost everything can affect our listening comprehension. The number of language learners who are capable of understanding almost every word they hear amounts to only a few percent. So let us discuss what are the internal and the external factors that can greatly affect students' listening comprehension. So for the internal factors, we have the learner characteristics. Are they leaders? Are they engaged? Are they determined or what? Next is the language proficiency, which talks about the students' language abilities. Next is their memory or the retention of information. Then age, gender, their background knowledge about the language or topic, as well as their aptitude or their natural talents. Next is their motivation, their psychological factors which emphasizes the student's motivation, self-efficacy, stress, anxiety, etc. And lastly, the physiological factors that can came from the atmospheric conditions and the physical health of the students. And for the external factors, it can be mainly related to the type of language input and tasks and the context in which listening occurs. So when we say external factors, it can be on the type of language input, meaning it emphasizes the exposure of the learners to authentic language use that can be from the teachers, the other learners, or the environment around the learner. So next is the tasks or the activities to be done in order for the students or for the learners to engage themselves in listening. And lastly, the context in which the situation, which the language was used. But then, let us ponder, is listening really that difficult? Or maybe there is something else at play here. So to answer these questions, let's take a look at the most critical factors affecting the student's listening comprehension. First is your pronunciation. For every word you encounter, you create your internal phonetic representation. So when we say phonetic representation, it deals with the production of speech sounds by humans, often without prior knowledge of the language being spoken. So in other words, it is how you think that a word should be pronounced. For example, the word that is spelled as Negligible. So when a student or when a learner who did not know this word, he or she can have the phonetic representations that this word can be pronounced as negligible or negligible and such. Next, you confront them with the external representation. So when we say external representations, it designates the structures in the environment that allow the learner to interact with some content domain. So meaning, it is how the words are really pronounced. So it deals with the correct pronunciation of the words. Thus, in dealing with the pronunciation, there must be a relationship with the student's phonetic and external representation. That's why there is a relationship between phonetic and external representation. So when the students encounter this word, he or she will be able to pronounce the word negligible. So it is pronounced as negligible. Lastly, this is the exact reason why you might understand a typical accent from a given country, but you will struggle with the dialect. So when you struggle with listening, meaning your internal representations are not broad enough to encompass new external representation. So if they overlap considerably, right, or they are identical, you should be able to understand a given word. So you will be able to listen effectively. So the next factor that can affect your students' listening comprehension is the students' knowledge about the grammar. So it's much more difficult to understand the deeper meaning of an utterance if you don't know how different words come together. So in grammar, you don't have to concentrate on learning every grammar construction in your language, though it is crucial for us to learn it. So it is difficult to understand the utterance if we don't know, if we don't have knowledge about the target language itself. So example, how the words are formed in a sentence and forms of words. So basically, it is suggested that you simply start with a functional grammar. So what do we mean by functional grammar? According to Collins, functional grammar is a grammar that puts together the patterns of the language and the things you can do with them is called a functional grammar. That is, it is based on the relation between the structure of a language and the various functions that the language performs. So basically, it is the relationship between the structure of language and functions of the language usage. It talks about the patterns, the form, or the structure of a language and how you will use it in various contexts. So hence, grammar is essential because it makes it possible for us to talk about language and understand what makes the utterances clear for our listening comprehension skills. So next factor is our knowledge of how sounds merge or get reduced. So unfortunately, not everything is what it seems. So when we say how sounds merge or get reduced, it's certainly to be the case with sounds. So in almost any language, there is a tendency of different sounds to be reduced or to be merged. So it primarily focuses on the pronunciation of the words, on how sounds merge or the phonological changes. And one example of that is the word controversy. So let us first discuss what is a phonological change in words. So it is when any sound change that alters the distribution of phonemes in language. So basically, it focuses on changes in the word's pronunciation. These changes can affect the way a single word is pronounced. So for example, the word controversy. I have read an article that the word controversy in UK, the older speakers used to say controversy, in which the stress was put in the first syllable of the word, while the younger speakers in UK pronounce the word controversy. They usually stress the second syllable in pronouncing the word controversy. So we can infer that there is a gradual shift on how the words was pronounced from the older speakers to younger speakers. Next, the student's knowledge on how sounds get reduced, or it tackles about vowel reduction. So when we say vowel reduction, it tackles on the various changes in the acoustic quality of vowels as a result of changes in stress, duration, loudness, articulation, etc. For example, the word bored and every. So it makes the vowel shorter, or the weakening of vowels. Instead of saying the sound of e in the word every, we omit, or we tend to weaken the vowel sound e in the word every. Same with the word bored. Instead of saying the sound of the a in the word bored, we omit the sound a in pronouncing the word board. So that is what we call vowel reduction. So if you don't grasp how these changes happen, it will take you much longer to decipher the ongoing situation or on the ongoing stream of speech. So let us now move on to the fourth factor that can affect your students' listening comprehension, which tackles about your overall listening time. So it happens way too often that readers who complains about their listening skills. So students, specifically language learners, often not giving much time to their listening practice. Try to ask how much time they devote to their listening practice. Sometimes or most of the time, students find listening difficult, especially when the task given to them inside the classroom is to listen from a passage, then answer some questions from it. So possibly, they can have problems with the interpretation of the passage because of their poor listening comprehension skills. So we all know that listening takes a lot of time. That's just the way it is. So just like the other skills, listening is also a skill that needs to be practiced in order to develop our listening comprehension skills. So for example, a student or individual can allot 15 minutes a day or as much as they can to practice their listening skills. They can watch an English movie or watch a talk from YouTube or listen to a recorded conversation, etc. Next factor is the visual support. So listening becomes much easier once you can see somebody's body language. So a lot of things which would get lost in the tangle of speech if the listener can focus. So visual support such as body language, nonverbal signals, and even pictures and symbols may assist students to maintain their attention and be able to understand the spoken language and create their own meaning. So a good listener is also a good observer. So a person's actions can tell something, or their person's body language can tell something. It can tell half of what the person or what the message truly means. Next factor is the student's vocabulary size. The more words you know, the easier it is to fish them out of a recording. So if the learner lacks in vocabulary, there is a great chance they will not completely understand what they are listening to. So if your current vocabulary is 1,000 words and you can figure out why you don't understand much, this might be the reason. So a wide range vocabulary improves all areas of communication. The learner's knowledge about words and their ability to link that to form a meaning is essential. So it is essential for students to learn vocabulary, and it is equally important to practice their listening skills. So vocabulary size matters in order for you to listen effectively. Next is the student's concentration. So you won't get far if you can focus on the activity at hand. So it is a strong predictor of listening comprehension. So learners' lack of focus greatly affect on how they will perceive what they have heard. You cannot pay attention if you are surrounded by noisy seatmates or the constantly distracted by loud noises coming from the environment. So you have to strap your butt to a chair and listen. So learn to refrain from distractions. Shift your attention to the activity, clear your mind, listen, or you jot down notes and process what you have heard. Sitting near the front is better than sitting at the back, so you can focus your attention better and you can listen to understand the message better and be able to create meaning of what the speakers says. Next, let us now move on to the two most important factors that affects your listening comprehension. First is the student's problems in language proficiency. When we say language proficiency, it can talks about the phonetics and phonology, like phonetic discrimination and phonetic varieties. So problems in language proficiency tackles about the ability of an individual to use language with a level of accuracy that transfers meaning in production and comprehension. So when we say phonetics, it talks about the speech sounds. When we say phonology, the system of sounds within a language or in a specific language, like phonetic discriminations or the differentiation of similar sounds when the information carried depends on the differences, and the phonetic varieties. Next is the problems in grammar, and lastly the lexicological problems or the selection of words or the terms used in listening. Next, it is the student's poor background knowledge about a topic or about the language. Next is the student's lack of motivation to listen. Next is the psychological factors. I know that we are very much aware of these factors, right? The psychological factors can be their problem on the student's attitude or their way of thinking or their feelings. Next is the aptitude or their special talents and abilities. And when we say self-efficacy, it is the individual beliefs on his or her capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce a specific performance attainment. So last, for the internal factors, is the other internal factors that can also be a hindrance for the students to have a better listening comprehension. First is the student's age. It says that younger learners tend to have difficulties in their listening comprehensions because they can't concentrate. Next is the attention span. It is the length of time that the student can concentrate in a listening activity. Next is the student's memory span, or the ability to the student's ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. Next is the student's reaction, or on how the student react on what they are hearing, and their sensitivity on the sounds, meaning of utterances, words, etc. Next, for the external factors, we have the speed of delivery and different accents of the speaker. It tackles on how fast does the speaker are talking and their different accents used in speaking. Next, the content and tasks of listening materials. It can be some recorded materials, someone is reading it aloud, or it can be from songs or recorded conversations. Next is the context. When we say context, we can be particular on the time and space at which the speaker makes an utterance in which the learner or listener hears the utterance itself. So it refers to the spatial temporal location of the utterance. So last, for the external factors, is the context. So when we say context, it is our interpretation, or it refers to the linguistic context or the textual environment provided by the discourse or text in which a particular utterance occurs. So basically, context is our interpretation of meaning. So it contains the words surrounding a particular word or passage within a text that provides context and help us to determine its meaning. For example, when a person asks, are you going to Baguio with us? And then he or she answers, I have a paper to finish by Monday. So we can infer that the person is not going to a picnic by judging from the context. So that is the
our discussion for the what are the factors affect our listening comprehension. So for our next discussion, in remedial instruction and listening, we will tackle about on how to improve our students' listening comprehension skills, what are the classroom activities that can be employed inside the classroom, and how to enhance your listening as an individual. So see you in our next session.